The Shadow Within, Part 8. Amidst the overgrowth that had claimed the landscape like a green sea around the skeletal remains of what once was a slaughterhouse, the group formed a somber huddle outside of the abandoned building. The twilight cast elongated shadows that crept towards the decrepit edifice, an ominous prelude to the night's encroachment. "Jack. He's not just dabbling in things beyond our world," murmured Eliza, her breath visible in the cooling air. "He's drowning in them." "Last time nearly tore us apart," replied Nathan, his hands clenched tight enough to whiten the knuckles. "We can't underestimate him." "Not again." The group collectively held a gaze heavy with unspoken fears. The abandoned building loomed before them, its windows like dark, unblinking eyes, and the facade pockmarked from years of neglect. "Each floorboard in there," started Sophie, her voice barely above a whisper, groans with secrets. "We tread carefully, understand?" "Carefully," echoed Kevin, adjusting the straps on his backpack filled with salt, iron, and other less conventional deterrents. "We're not dealing with typical haunts or poltergeists. Jack's different." They approached the structure, the gravel underfoot protesting with each step. The air seemed to thicken with a pungent mix of mold and decay as they neared the entrance, the once grand double doors now hanging askew on rusted hinges. Sarah's mind raced with the possible traps that awaited within. Her pulse quickened at the thought of facing Jack again, the man who could smile with warmth even as he plotted your downfall. It was a dangerous dance, one wrong step and... "Look at it," whispered Jack, his hand gesturing to the building's failing exterior. "It's like it's breathing. Waiting." "The shadow being's influence," Marcus posited, his brow furrowed. "Or whatever it is that's got its hooks into Jack." "Whatever we face in there," Sarah interjected, stepping closer to the threshold, "we do it together. No heroics. We find whatever I-formation we can to stop the shadow being, and save Jack. If he can still be saved." "Agreed," Kevin muttered, though doubt gnawed at him. Could someone so consumed by darkness ever find their way back? He shook the thought away. They had to try. As they crossed the boundary into the shadow of the building, an oppressive silence enveloped them. The broken windows seemed to moan with the faintest wind. The air inside held a tension that set their nerves on edge. With each step forward, the reality of their quest settled heavy on their shoulders. This was more than a rescue mission, this was a battle for their very souls. The darkness within the abandoned building seemed to devour their flashlight beams, rendering the light feeble against the all-encompassing gloom. Sara led the way, her piercing blue eyes scanning the shadows that clung to the peeling walls like cobwebs. She could hear the shuffling of her companions behind her, their movements hesitant, their breathing a chorus of quiet anxiety. "Keep close," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it boomed in the hollow space. "There are stories about places like this. Places where the walls have seen too much." Behind her, Kevin's chuckle was nervous, an attempt to cut through the tension. "Probably just stories to keep kids from sneaking in and getting hurt," he said, though his voice betrayed his doubt. "Maybe," Dr. Simmons replied softly, her warm eyes alert as she glanced around. "But we can't discount anything. Not after what we've witnessed with Jack." Sara felt the chill of the building seep into her bones. The air was thick with a history of silence and secrets. Each room they passed whispered of abandonment, the debris-strewn floors a testament to long-forgotten turmoil. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, as if disturbed by the intrusion of the living. As they delved deeper, the corridors narrowed, and the atmosphere grew heavier, as though the building itself was pressing down upon them. It was then that Sarah's foot caught on an uneven floorboard. She stumbled, catching herself against the wall, her hand brushing against the rough surface. Beneath layers of grime and old wallpaper, she felt the outline of something carved into the wood. "Guys, look at this," she called out, her fingers tracing the grooves. They gathered around, and Dr. Simmons used her sleeve to wipe away years of neglect, revealing an array of symbols etched into the wall. They were neither letters nor numbers but spoke a language of angles and curves that seemed to twist the eye and mind. "Are these runes?" Kevin asked, squinting at the markings. "More than that," Dr. Simmons replied, her voice hushed, "these are sigils. Protective wards, perhaps. Or something else entirely. Could this be used to open a portal between worlds?" Sara pondered aloud, feeling the weight of the implications. "Only one way to find out," came the grim resolve in Kevin's reply. They continued, following the trail of enigmatic symbols until they reached a door different from the rest. It was sturdy, unmarred by time, with a single sigil emblazoned upon its center. Pushing it open required a collective effort, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the hidden room lay shrouded in dust and shadows, but even the dimness couldn't conceal the treasures it held. Shelves lined with artifacts, scrolls, and objects of indiscernible origin filled the space. Each piece pulsed with an energy that prickled Sara's skin, making the fine hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. "Look at this," Jack whispered, holding up a tarnished amulet inscribed with more symbols. His deep-set eyes flickered with a mix of fear and fascination. "It's like we've stepped into another era." "Or another world," Sara added, her gaze locked onto an ancient tome. She brushed off the cover, revealing a title written in the same cryptic script as the sigils outside. Her heart raced. They had stumbled upon a repository of knowledge, perhaps the key to understanding the Shadow Being's realm. Jack's consciousness. It could be in jeopardy, Dr. Simmons mused, her voice tinged with worry as she examined a set of handwritten notes scattered amongst the relics. "Then we need to use whatever we can from this room to stop it," Sara stated, determination stealing her voice. This was no longer just a matter of survival, it was about saving someone who had become a victim of the very darkness they sought to banish. In this chamber of forgotten lore, surrounded by the whispers of antiquity, the group found a new resolve. Here lay the tools and wisdom of those who had faced the supernatural before them. Now it was their turn to stand against the encroaching shadows, for Jack, for themselves, and for the glimmer of hope that still flickered in the dark. Sara's breath caught as her flashlight beam settled on an outline in the wall, a door, cleverly concealed behind a hanging tapestry that depicted a cosmic dance of darkness and light. "Over here," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the hum that now filled the air. The fabric felt cold to the touch, ancient threads giving way to her pull as she drew it back. "Is that?" Kevin trailed off, his eyes widening at the sight of the hidden entrance. "Looks like it." Michelle's voice was steady but tinged with awe, her hand reaching out to trace the strange symbols etched around the doorframe. "Careful," Sara warned. Her pulse quickened as she studied the glyphs, each one pulsating rhythmically as if keeping time with their own heartbeats. The group shared a look, a silent consensus passing between them. With a collective breath, they pushed the door open. A soft groan emanated from its hinges, betraying the passage of innumerable years. An ethereal luminescence spilled forth, bathing their faces in hues of indigo and silver. They stepped into the chamber, and the world outside seemed to fall away, leaving only the unearthly glow that enveloped them like a tangible presence. "Feels like we're walking into a dream," Kevin murmured, his usual jovial tone now edged with reverence. "Or a nightmare," Sara thought but kept to herself, pressing forward as the others followed suit. The chamber stretched out before them, vast and enigmatic. In its center stood a stone dais, atop which swirled the source of the unearthly light, a portal. It pulsed rhythmically, as if breathing, casting distorted shadows along the walls. "Unbelievable." Dr. Simmons breathed out, her eyes reflecting the swirls of color that bled from the portal. "Look at it," Sara said, her gaze locked onto the mesmerizing display. She could feel the energy washing over her in waves, setting her nerves alight with both fear and fascination. "Can you feel that?" Kevin reached out a tentative hand, then snatched it back as if burned. "It's like it's alive." "Energy," Sara voiced the thought that danced on the edge of her understanding. "It's pure, raw energy? But from where?" "Somewhere not meant for us," Dr. Simmons concluded, her analytical mind grappling with the impossible reality before them. Her fingers curled into fists, knuckles white against the encroaching light. "We need to be careful." "Too late for caution," Sara retorted, her resolve hardening. "This is what's been tugging at the edges of Jack's mind, what's feeding that shadow being." "Then we shut it down," Dr. Simmons declared, stepping beside Sara. There was no room for doubt in the face of such a threat. "Agreed," Kevin nodded, swallowing hard. He glanced around the chamber, searching for anything that might aid them. "Jack's counting on us," Sara reminded them, though her thoughts churned with the enormity of their task. How does one close a door that should never have been opened? How do they fight a foe that defies the very laws of nature? "Let's find a way," Dr. Simmons urged, her voice cutting through Sara's reverie. As they circled the dais, the portal's glow intensified, echoing the urgency that now coursed through their veins. They were trespassers in a realm of shadows and light, standing on the precipice of the unknown. Yet, amid the fear and awe, a singular truth anchored Sara's spiraling thoughts: they were the only ones who could stem the tide of darkness threatening to spill into their world. And they would not falter. The phosphorescent glow of the portal enveloped them, casting their shadows long and distorted against the chamber walls. Sara's gaze was drawn to the churning vortex before them, her breath catching in her throat as she peered into its depths. Visions flickered rapidly, like a zoetrope spun by an unseen hand, grotesque creatures with too many eyes and limbs that bent in unnatural ways, writhing and twisting within landscapes that defied geometry. "God," Kevin whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of otherworldly energy. "Look at them. It's like staring into a nightmare." "More like gazing through one," Dr. Simmons murmured, her fascination tinged with dread. Sara couldn't tear her eyes away, her pulse throbbing in her temples. Each creature seemed to be a manifestation of pure horror, a sentinel guarding the threshold between sanity and madness. The landscape shifted and contorted, forests of bone-white trees, mountains that bled crimson rivers, skies filled with swirling voids. It was beauty entwined with terror, a stark reminder of the chaos lurking beyond their realm. "Is that where it comes from?" Kevin's voice quivered as he gestured toward the maelstrom of darkness. "The shadow being?" Dr. Simmons nodded gravely. "It makes sense. This is the source, it's the heart of all that's been happening." Jack's mind. "It must be a beacon for it." Sara felt a chill creep up her spine. This was the nexus, the wellspring of the supernatural storm that had upended their lives. The shadow being, that enigmatic specter, was not just a random phantasm but a denizen of this terrifying place. It fed off Jack, fueled by his consciousness, binding him to its will. "Then we're cutting off its food supply," she stated, determination replacing the fear that knotted her stomach. "Whatever it takes." As if on cue, the air around them grew colder, the light dimmer. They glanced at each other, a silent agreement passing between them. They would sever this connection, stop the malevolent force from leaching into their world. "Let's focus," Dr. Simmons said, her hands moving with purpose as she examined the arcane symbols etched into the stone around the portal. "We need to understand how to close it. There has to be a way." Sara watched her companions, their silhouettes stark against the eerie backdrop. They were a small band of rebels, fighting a war they barely understood. But they were united in their resolve. "Jack," she thought, her mind reaching out to her friend lost in the shadow of his own mind. "We are going to save you. We're going to save all of us." And with that thought anchoring her, Sara stepped forward, ready to challenge the abyss. The musty air clung to Sara's skin as she peered over Dr. Simmons' shoulder, the beam from her flashlight carving through the darkness to illuminate a cluster of moth-eaten journals and brittle parchments scattered across the decrepit desk. Their edges were curling, pages yellowed with age and secrets. "Look at this," Dr. Simmons muttered, her fingers gingerly turning a page. "Others have been here before us, others who knew of the shadow being." "Anything useful?" Sara asked, her voice a hushed thread in the pressing silence. "More than useful. It's a chronicle of madness," the doctor replied, her eyes scanning lines of feverish handwriting. "It details everything, the portal, the creatures. And Jack." "Jack?" Sara repeated, the name catching in her throat like a barbed hook. "According to these entries." Dr. Simmons paused, swallowing hard. "The shadow being is parasitic. It feeds from him, siphoning his essence, distorting time and reality around him." Sara's heart hammered against her ribs, a syncopated rhythm of fear and resolve. The group crowded in closer, their collective breaths heavy with anticipation. She reached out, fingertips brushing the parchment as though touching it could somehow bridge the gap between them and Jack. "His consciousness," she whispered, the words laced with a dawning horror. "That's why he's been slipping away from us." "Exactly," Dr. Simmons confirmed. "He's not just haunted, he's hunted. This entity, it's drawing from him, using him as an anchor to our world." "Then we need to break that anchor," Sara said, her resolve crystallizing into action. "Be cautious," warned Michael, his voice a low rumble. "We don't know what severing the connection might do to him, or to us." "Let's worry about that after we ensure that thing can't hurt anyone else," Sara shot back, her determination unwavering despite the tremor she felt deep within her bones. "Here," Dr. Simmons pointed to a passage in the journal. It speaks of times when the shadow being became more active, aligning with moments of Jack's intense emotions. Anger, fear, passion, it thrives on these, grows stronger. Explains the recent incidents, Michael added, the last word trailing off as if the full scope of Jack's experiences was too vast to encapsulate in speech. Jack's probably always had a darkness in him, an edge, Sara thought to herself, her mind racing. But lately, it's like he's been 2 steps removed from reality, lost in a world we can't reach. Because he's part of that, Dr. Simmons concluded, tapping the journal as if to punctuate the gravity of their situation. Then it's settled, Sara declared, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her companions. We find a way to shut this portal and cut off the shadow being's lifeline. For Jack's sake, and ours. Agreed, they echoed, each voice laced with its own shade of fear and bravery. Their hands touched the artifacts and symbols surrounding them, a silent vow passing between them. They would delve deeper into the mysteries enshrouded within these ancient texts, wrestle with knowledge that humankind was never meant to possess, and confront the chilling whispers that promised revenge. Let's get to work, Sara instructed, the urgency of their task making her voice steadier than she felt. We'll piece together the puzzle, one haunting truth at a time. Sara's hands trembled slightly as she laid out the artifacts on a tattered cloth map they had found amongst the journals. The symbols, once foreign and ominous, now resonated with an energy that seemed to hum in harmony with the thrumming pulse from beyond the hidden door. Michael, who had taken upon himself the role of interpreter of the ancient scripts, traced his fingers over the intricate designs etched into a rusted amulet. According to this, he said, his voice low and steady, we need to align these relics according to the cardinal directions. It's a form of containment. Like a compass? Dr. Simmons interjected, adjusting his glasses as he peered at the text over Michael's shoulder. More like a lock, Michael replied. A temporal one, at least. It won't last forever, but it might give us enough time to figure out a more permanent solution. Then there's no time to waste, Sara murmured to herself, her mind weaving through the implications of their actions. This was uncharted territory, each step an incantation, each breath a defiance against the natural order. They placed the artifacts carefully, aligning them with trembling precision as the hidden room seemed to grow colder, the shadows stretching longer and more sinister. With each artifact set, a sense of foreboding tightened around Sara's heart. She could almost feel the shadow being's gaze, its attention now fixated on their every move. Ready? Michael asked, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of determination and dread. Ready, she confirmed, giving a nod that felt like sealing a pact with fate itself. Continue the story with Part 9. Don't forget to like and subscribe.